1942, Theresienstadt. Ilse writes, I'm walking through Theresienstadt, my heart as heavy as lead. Suddenly there is a wall in front of me. I know what is behind that wall. There is a bridge and a valley, and that is my home. Oh, how I would love to keep walking. But I have to turn around. Theresienstadt, Theresienstadt. When will we ever be free again? Ich wandre durch Theresienstadt, das Herz so schwer wie Blei. Bis je mein Weg ein Ende hat, bis je mein Weg ein Ende hat, dort knacken der Bastei. Dort knacken der Bastei. Dann bleib ich auf der Brücke stehen und schau ins Tal hinaus. Ich möchte so gerne weitergehen, ich möchte so gerne weitergehen, ich möchte so gern nach Haus. Ich möchte so gern nach Haus. Ich wende mich betrübt und matt, so schwer wird mir dabei. Theresienstadt, Theresienstadt, wann wohl mein Leid kein Ende hat, wann sind wir wieder frei? Wann sind wir wieder frei? Ilse wrote this song as a poem to the children in Theresienstadt. She was a nurse in the hospital. At night she would sing the songs to her own poetry. Well, a year later she was put onto the train to Auschwitz, together with all the children from the hospital and together with her own family, her husband and her own children. And we know she was never seen again. Now, welcome to all of you in the world. Good day and good evening to you out there in Europe too. I'm so grateful to be able to reach you, and that Carnegie Hall has provided this platform to be able to communicate with you in these difficult times where the music has stopped. The concert halls are closed, the opera houses, the ballets, the museums are closed, and we have no idea when the stages of the world will open up again. Yet the desire for music and the spirit of the music, the healing force of the music is greater than ever. I want to tell you a story today. It is a difficult journey. It is a difficult journey that breaks my heart, but a journey of absolute necessity into the darkest chapters of history, into the depth of human suffering in the face of genocide, its exploration of pure evil of the human mind and soul, its relentless pursuit, bureaucratic pursuit, with unspeakable actions and crimes against humanity, the Holocaust. And today is Remembrance Day of the Holocaust. This year we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camps. In January it was Auschwitz. 10 days ago, a week ago, it would have been Bergen-Belsen. And those very few survivors that are still alive and among us, they're all in their 90s now, were invited. And so was my good friend Oli Bagel, who lives in Mexico City, as her mother is a survivor of Bergen-Belsen. Her mother was liberated by the American army on the infamous death train near Fasleben. The Nazis had crammed thousands of prisoners before the Allies could arrive onto these trains to get them out of the death camp, to eliminate any proof of human failure and cruelties inside the camps. But then the Russians came from one side and the Americans from the other, and they abandoned the train. So Yeti Bagel, Oli's mother, was being liberated. I will see Oli in a little bit of time and I will talk to her. She's in Mexico City. Now I want to dedicate this hour to the 6 million Jewish people that were assassinated brutally by the German nationalists and their collaborators. 6 million is such a vast number. It is an unbearable number in the wake of what we're experiencing right now, and I really don't want to compare, but look, we have 2.5 million infections of coronavirus around the world. We have 200,000 deaths, and that is terrible and tragic. Each death is unbearable. But just see how vast this number is, 6 million. In the course of 6 to 8 years during the Holocaust, 1.5 million of these people were children. And I want to dedicate this hour also to all those other thousands of prisoners who were humiliated and killed, political prisoners, people of different ethnicities that weren't welcomed by the Nazis, disabled people, and homosexuals. And I want to dedicate this to all those after the Holocaust who have been discriminated, humiliated, beaten, broken down, through until our time, through human arrogance and anti-Semitism and racism that still exists in our times today. Now, I find it difficult to even look back right now because everyone wants to just look forward, open the world up again, find our jobs, open up the schools, the cultural institutions, just get back life to some kind of normality. Why look back? Well, that is exactly what the survivors faced upon the liberation. They said, well, my body survived, but my soul didn't. They were faced with an unbearable reality. They had lost all their friends, their family members, their home. They had nowhere to go and no one to talk to. They were left alone with their memories and their dreams, nightmares, and even with the guilt of having survived. Very few of them documented what happened because the world didn't want to hear about it. The world just wanted to look forward, into one direction forward after the horrible events of World War II. Shmerke Kaczerginsky survived the Holocaust as a partisan in the woods of Lithuania. He had escaped the ghetto in Vilnius and finally made it to New York in 1946. He started immediately a collection of songs that he had heard from the prisoners traversing the Atlantic Ocean, from the survivors, delivered by word of mouth, songs he had heard in the ghetto in Vilnius, songs from other survivors told and talked about. Memories. The first edition of this book, Songs Never Silenced, was published in 1948 here in New York. And there were several editions later on that were published by Velvel Pasternak, who is still a neighbor here on the Upper West Side in Manhattan, somewhere. Songs Never Silenced, he called them. This is a book that was given to me by Orly Bagel, my good friend, 10 years ago or even longer. And she said, Ute, one day sing these songs for me. I decided 5 years ago for the 70th anniversary of the Holocaust and the liberation of the camps to create this program. We describe the year 1942. Songs written waiting in the long lines for a watery cup of soup. Songs written waiting in the long lines, walking into the gas chambers. Songs, cradle songs, songs of consolation, sung to the children at night. Songs that celebrated life, glory, faith, happiness, and the future. Songs of rebellion, even if the rebellion was simply called hope, as hope couldn't be prohibited. In 1942, there was a musical competition in the ghetto in Vilnius. A young boy called Alexander Volkovisky wrote a beautiful melody, a composition, and Shmerke Kaczerginsky himself had written the words. It was indeed a song of rebellion, but rather a song of hope. Be quiet, little child. Don't cry, the enemy won't hear us. It is beautiful outside and the skies are blue, yet the enemy only wants us to see the darkness. Horsemen, come quickly and take away our children into the future and towards the light. Don't smile, little child, it could betray us. Don't smile. Let him think we only see the darkness, but in our hearts we see the light and the hope at the end of this tunnel. Stiller, stiller, loh mir schweigen, Chor im wachsenden Dom. Sabensee verpflanzt die Sonnen, grünen See zum Blau. Es wären Wegen zu Nacht, es wird kein Weg zurück. Ist der da wo verschwunden und mit ihm das Glück. Stiller Kind, meins weh nicht erzählt, Hälfte nicht gehen gewehen. Unser Glück, wenn es schon im Sein, wir nicht verstehen. So bringt es euch die Armen, so spießt es euch jetzt zusammen. Nur zu unser Feind, kein bisschen Schein, kein bisschen Schein. Frieden auf Land gekommen und uns Harz gebracht. Ist der Tag ein voll mit Blumen und seit nur die Nacht. Goldig steht der Herbst durchstand, blieb in uns der Zar. Bleibt für Josef Wurm, armes Kind, geht heut und Nacht. Wie die Hageschmiede hat euch gejocht in Bein. Ziehen Krieg, Eis durch Liede, hieß die Nimmerei. Es wird der Heucher Fuß ruhen, von die finster leuchten Sohlen. Reiter, komm geschwind, ich ruf dein Kind, ich ruf dein Kind. Den Harz herum. Bis der Feuer wird nicht fallen, sein Biermutzen stumm. Weil ich Kind, es ist ein Schmeichel, ist für uns Verrat, denn den Frühling soll der Säune wie in Herbst erblatt. Soll er quasi ruhig fließen, stiller sein und hoch. Mit der Freiheit weit gut der Tate Schlaf, sie geht mein Schlaf, wie die Befreite, wie die Baby beneite, leucht bald feierlich auf dein Gesicht, auf dein Gesicht. La 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 la, la ya la la, ya ya la la ya, la 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 ya la la la, ya ya la la la, ya 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 la la la, ya ya la la la, Shtiler, written by Alexander Volkovisky. After the Holocaust, he was able to leave Europe and to finally arrive in Israel. He left and he lived very long. He just passed away about a year ago under the name of Alexander Tamir in Israel. I want to introduce my two wonderful musicians. My son Max on guitar. So it is. We live together in this house, and I'm so happy that we are able to do this together. It is an incredible experience to do this with my own child. And on the piano, Vanna Gierig, with whom I worked for so many years, more than 15 years. And you know Max as a little boy when we started working. And now he is here with us making music. And you came from downtown Manhattan with
on my bicycle.
On your bicycle. So welcome to all of you again. And I want to come to a very important moment for me to actually introduce you to my good friend Oli Bagel in Mexico. Oli, are you there?
I'm here. I'm so honored to be in this program. Really,
good to see you, my dear.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. You and me, we were supposed to be right now in Germany. Last week was the commemoration of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, and you asked me to come along with you as your friend, as you have never been to Germany.
Never. The pain was too strong in the soul, so it was going to be a very important experience, and I would go to Germany, but only with you, Ute.
Oh, thank you, my dear, and thank you again for giving me this music book years and years ago. It is important for me, and to sing it to you especially. You brought Songs of Eternity to Mexico City last year too, and that was a very special event for us. But let's talk about your mother, Yeti.
Okay.
She was a survivor of Bergen-Belsen. Tell us a little bit what happened and where she came from.
My mother was born in a very little town in Poland called Polski Teschin, in the border with Czechoslovakia. And she was taken first to the ghetto of Bochnia after 2 years that the war started. And she worked outside the ghetto. They allowed her to work. And she worked in a factory of uniforms for Nazis. And she would come every day back and forth from the ghetto. She lived in a kitchen for 2 years in a house of a woman that later on went to Auschwitz but survived Auschwitz. And from there, she was with her sister that was about 22 years older than her, Gisela Katz. And she had a husband outside of Poland already and got papers to be able to be interchanged in a place that was called the Sonderlager in Bergen-Belsen to interchange for soldiers that were in Palestine, something that it never happened. So she was never changed. But she wasn't in the papers. Only my aunt was in the papers. And she risked her life.
Yeah. And she was able to learn languages, you told me, inside the camp.
Inside the camp, yeah. She was in Bergen-Belsen for 2 years. And she would say the story that everybody in the camp was the same. She came in contact with people that will never have a chance, coming from such a poor family and religious family that she came. But there in the camp, everybody was a prisoner. So she paid with bread in order to learn English and French, something that helped her later when she was liberated in the death train that you mentioned in Farsleben, to speak with the Americans. She asked them, why are you so sad, when she saw them? And they said, because yesterday our president died. That was Roosevelt. So that way she knew that on the 13th of April, 1945, she came to life. She was liberated.
Yes.
And from there, she went to Buchenwald, already liberated, with the Americans. They gave her food and medicine for about 40 days or 2 months, more or less. And from there, she took a train going to Paris. And there is a very, very famous picture of my mother that is going around the world now, of she in a window of a train arriving to Paris.
Can we see this picture? Yeah, there it is.
Now we see it.
That's her on the left side.
She's on the left side. Yes. And the face of happiness, of liberated, you know, after the horrors and the terrible life they had in the camp. The lady on the right was in Auschwitz, and later she became the best friend of my mother. And they went to the window just to see what happened in Paris, because there was music and bands, and there was a red carpet. They wanted to see who was the celebrity that was arriving to Paris. They were the celebrity. They were received there in Paris, and from there they went to Marseille, took a ship, and went to Palestine.
And that's where the Israeli flag that they're hanging out of the window. Tell us about it.
Yes, they took the cloth from wherever they could, and they built it. They saw it the way they just wanted to show freedom, and that's why you see the flag that it's not complete. You know, it's broken at the end.
Yeah.
But and the state of Israel wasn't created yet.
Not yet, no.
It was 1945. So that's why it's so strong. The happiness in the face, the freedom, and to show the flag, to show that freedom.
Now, Orly, I know you because you brought me to Mexico City as a music promoter, presenter. You basically built my career in Mexico City. I've been there first in the 90s, and it's been more than 20 years ago that you invited me the first time, and also to Israel to sing in the Man Auditorium. And so I want to ask you, we had a very special bond, and it was also at the same time, as much as it was beautiful, and it was also very somehow not painful, but it was there were so many haunted ghosts in the middle of you being a child of a Holocaust survivor and of me being German. So first of all, I want to ask you a little bit, and I've asked you so many times, about your journey as a child of a Holocaust survivor. How did you experience the upbringing? Where were you born? And what did your mother tell you during your years of the childhood?
My mother was married in Israel with Yosef Beigel. I have to mention my father because he lived also with the monsters of the Holocaust that my mother brought at home. And I have two siblings, a brother and a sister, that live in Israel. And I am the youngest. I was born in Mexico after Israel, after the state of Israel was created. My mother had family in Mexico, so they came here and I was born here. And I can tell you, I'm not speaking in the name of second generations, but I can tell you that I lived on a shadow of a war that I did not live. I always say that the Holocaust for me did not finish or ended when they closed the gas chambers or when they closed the gates of the camps. It remains until today in the memory of the sadness and the melancholy of the eyes of my mother. And I was told many stories. I was told horror stories that a little kid could never understand. But I wanted to listen. I wanted to try to repair whatever she lived before. But that was impossible. I was too young. The guilt of living in a world that was better of what she had to live. Because she arrived to the camp when she was 17. And her life was cut short with those stories of carts full of dead, and the rats and the lice, and to eat one egg a day. Excuse me. I'm very emotional about it. I'm speaking about my mother. They gave them an egg a year. So that's why we never could throw food in the house. The food was a very important issue. Actually, today with COVID-19, food is also a very important thing.
So you created, your career, though, had a lot to do with the commemoration of the Holocaust. I remember you invited me years ago to come to Mexico City to sing at the celebration Nunca Más, Never Again, with many artists all over the world. It has always been for you. But tell me about your mission that you carry on into our time.
I do think, of course, that the second generation has a legacy, and we have a responsibility to continue the memory. It would be horrible to forget. Many children of Holocaust want to forget about the past, but I think it's a contemporary issue. And I do dedicate my life to music. I can tell you that my mother showed me, besides the horror stories, she showed me a love to life, the love to cinema, the love to music and to opera. All that, she painted wonderfully. She really took from wherever she could the strength to show me that I should be resilient, to be happy, and but unfortunately the monsters of the Holocaust, those shadows, those horrible experiences she had, she couldn't cope with that, and she decided to finish with the pain that I never spoke about this in public, Ute, and I'm doing it because of you, because of the honor and the privilege you are giving me to tell the story of my mother in front of so many people. I want everybody to know the story of my mother and to know that we are a second generation that still need to continue the legacy of the Holocaust. And my mother decided to depart this world and leave us with...
You were how old?
I was 26, but in the Shiva, we make Shiva. It was in my birthday of 27. My mother departed 2 days before my birthday, and I lost my father 2 months before. So the road has been a hard road. But
thank you so much for your incredible story. We have so many other guests. I could talk with you for an hour. I just want to remember one thing. When I came first to Israel, it was 1988 with my Kurt Weill evening. It was in the Auditorium Mann. Zubin Mehta was conducting. And the auditorium was filled with Holocaust survivors. They came after the concert to me. They sang with me throughout the songs, especially the Zuarbaya, Johnny, I remember. And they came to me and they said, thank you so much for bringing us back this music from our time. And I remember one story that Marlene Dietrich told when she went to Israel, 1960, to also perform in the Auditorium Mann in Tel Aviv to the Israeli audience. It was, of course, filled with Holocaust survivors. She said she had to ask for permission to sing in German as the language was too painful and would evoke too many painful memories. So yes, tell us one last statement about music, because music is your life, and I know you have
it is wonderful. I would like to read you something that I wrote exactly on that concert of Never Again, a Concert to Life in 2006. I believe in the power of music to transform our lives and allow us to look at the world in new ways. I believe in the force of art to challenge the force of death, to create memory where death imposes unforgiveness, to offer abundance when pain seems to deprive us of everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Orly. I see you soon. Thank you. Love to you there in Mexico City.
Love to you too.
We described the year 1942. The Jewish people were driven out of the cities into the ghettos, from the ghettos into the concentration camps. Rikle Glezer writes a poem. It is put in music by Yablokov. She says, look at us. We're walking and walking. Where are we walking to? When will this end? Behind us, books, tears, in the dirt, memories, hats. Children, our future. If you would tell the story to a stone, the stone would cry. The earth has all of that swallowed up forever. Sie ist für wen Zumer Tog, wie ständig Sommer stehen. Und die Natur hat dann gehört, in sich ist so viel Wehen. Es haben Vögel gesungen, freilich sich herumgesprungen. Im Ghetto hat man uns geheißen, gehen. Ach, stellt sich vor, was ist von uns geworden? Verstanden haben wir, sie ist alles verloren. Es hat nicht geholfen, unser Beten, er soll mit uns retten. Verlassen haben wir doch unser Heim. Gezeugen hat sich lang der Weg, es ist schwer gewählt zu gehen. Mir durch das gucken dich auf uns, zerweht von sich stehen. Gegangen seien Schäden, Kinder wie von der Rakete in der Menschensblut geflossen in die Gas. Wir seinen Hahn mir versparte, verpeinigte von Leben ob Gnade. Wer 100 Tagen ohne Mann, selten wäre es zusammen, der Söhne der gerecht sein Häusen zieht. Gewesen waren wir zu viel, befeuillen hat der Haar, zu bringen jeden von der Ruhe und schießen auf Polar, aus seinen Gehören stieb ober voll der fertige Rieber, der Säune hat der gerecht sein Kreuzen Ziel. Und auf Polar, jetzt lädt man auf die Wege, mit Sachen Hitler durchgenässt von der Regen. Das seien Sachen von Carbones, von die Heilige nicht Schummels, die Erde sie auf ewig zugedeckt. Ja, und jetzt ist wieder sonnig schön, schmeckt warm und leise Ruhe. Und wir seien Verpeinigte und leiden alle stumm, abgeschnitten von der Welt, mit euch in Mäuern verstellt. Ein Strahl von Hoffnung, der erweckt sie And Zumer Tog, written by Rikle Glezer to the music of Yablokov. Now, I want to go to meet a wonderful musician, a neighbor in the neighborhood here in Manhattan, a world-renowned cellist, Jan Volkler. Are you there, Jan?
Yes, hello Ute.
Hello, let's speak some English here.
Wonderful singing, bravo.
Thank you. The spirit of the songs is most important, not even the presentation. You were also, as all of us, we're all in the same boat, you were you were supposed to go out there in the world and give concerts right now in London with the BBC Philharmonics, at Dresden Musikfest Shtiler, your own festival actually. You were supposed to play Bloch and Schulhoff and Beethoven and Schubert, and all of that, of course, is not happening. So it is quite a strange time, isn't it, for us artists?
It is a strange time. I'm trying to learn from it and take something positive out of it. There's definitely room for reflection and also to rethink our future as traveling artists. So I do feel it's something I can learn from this crisis, definitely. Some humility also maybe towards the nature and its power towards us, I think.
Knowing that so many people have lost their pure existence right now. Their paycheck, their monthly paycheck, their jobs and everything. So we still have the music at least, right? So Jan, listen, you and me were almost the same generation. We grew up in the 60s, but you were on the east side of Germany. I was on the west side. And we experienced, first of all, the education about the Holocaust a little bit in a different way, but also our society, our culture was very different. Tell us a little bit how you felt becoming a musician and how this limitation of freedom of expression and freedom of music was lived over there in the east of Germany.
Yes, I was very lucky because in East Germany, everything was within the family. You couldn't take so much positive impulse from the communist government, but you could learn from your family. My parents had a wonderful library with many American books. Was my first touch with American culture. Anything from Hemingway to Faulkner. There was the Komische Oper with fantastic productions by Walter Felsenstein. My father played the cello there. There was the Berlin Symphony Orchestra with Sanderling. My mother played the violin there. And of course, I was in a family where everybody who came had a musical instrument coming to our house. So I grew up in a world of culture, but really in the cell of the family and friends. Which
were you able to read the books you wanted to read, or was there a censorship, of course?
There was censorship, but we had at home even books by Solzhenitsyn and really forbidden books, or Günter Grass. My father was really a very intense reader, and he had friends whom he taught in the West cello playing, and they would bring books to East Berlin and records and music. So we were very lucky, and I must say that I remember my youth in East Germany culturally very rich, although it was quite opposite to the spirit of the East German government and atmosphere.
Yeah. So I remember I moved to Berlin from Vienna in 1983. I had just finished a year of playing theater in Vienna and music school, and I came to the Cold War Berlin. West Berlin was the little scarred island in the middle of the East Bloc. There was a wall around us. We didn't know, often we had the Berlin collar, the Berlin frenzy we would call, because we couldn't go anywhere, but there was just one train line connecting us to the West. And I remember this was a very important time for me because it was ugly at the same time, so realistic. It always reminds me of an expressionist painting by Otto Dix or something, just the reality of it. It was so cruel and so unromantic. And I remember this time defined me as an artist and as a German also. I studied the music of Kurt Weill and started recording there. And sometimes we went to East Berlin and saw productions at the Berliner Ensemble Theater. It was the Stasi theater, right? It was a VIP theater. The tickets went to the party members, and everything was very much in the socialist spirit of Brecht, the way they thought Brecht would be able to manipulate people and influence and convince them. Tell me a little bit. Did you watch productions at the Berliner Ensemble in the 80s?
More opera than theater, but we did go to the theaters, also to the Deutsche Theater, and there was in between the lines, the artists, they were hiding some secrets. So for us, we could read between the lines, and we could read some opposition and some kind of quiet revolution. And I think the intellectuals in East Berlin were very keen to bring their messages in. And if you knew the circle, you would hear some little words which were quite sensational for us.
Yeah, you had to be careful because there was the secret police, the Stasi, and they were all over the place, and you were told to betray your neighbor, to betray your family member, even if they had thoughts that were not according to the thoughts of the regime. That was terrible, right?
Yes, but I must say that my parents were very alert about it, and I was very happy after when the war came down, and I read my little Stasi file. It was not so big. My little Stasi file, I did not find any friend nor family member which showed us that we had a very tightly knit community, and it was such a great relief to feel that we had such a great community during these times. And
then on the 9th of November 1989, the wall came down. Where were you at this point?
Ironically, in New York City.
You know, me too.
I was in New York
City.
We were probably some of the very few Germans in town. I was probably one of the very few East Germans. It was my first US tour with musicians from Marlborough, the wonderful festival in Vermont, had invited me. Yeah. And it took months to get the visa, and I arrived here. And a few days into the stay, my friends told me they saw on TV the wall came down. I just said, you misunderstood something.
Yes, yeah.
Because it was so unthinkable for us. Even with all the preparation, we were not prepared for this huge leap in history. And I think then we found Germans on the street, and we were hugging each other. It was a spirit which we unfortunately lost a little bit in the coming decades. But I felt it was a spirit of the world coming together. And
it was unbelievable, the moment of history. Yes, I was actually that day also in a taxi in New York. I heard it through the taxi with my pianist, who was a Berliner, and Jürgen Knieper, and we couldn't believe it. But 3 days later, we were back in Berlin, and we saw it. The enthusiasm, it's true. It was overwhelming for that moment. And now we celebrated the 30-year anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Ooh, and this is a thunderstorm. You hear it too, right? So it just has been 30 years now. And still, the wounds of the separation are still bleeding. It's just very difficult, this process. But hopefully we will get to better times and have a way to get together in a human understanding too, because it was a difficult road, those 30 years, indeed.
Yes, more difficult than anticipated, I think. But on a positive note, I do think that this crisis should bring us and show us how lucky we are to live in a democracy and to actually feel that the times we are living and that we sometimes complaining about things which are maybe not that bad. So I feel the crisis might teach us something about our advanced democracies.
So you chose to perform a piece written by Schulhoff for us. Tell me about the piece. Schulhoff was a Weimar composer, experimental composer, like Kurt Weill, like Busoni, like Ullmann, many others, and he was definitely of Jewish heritage, and he died throughout the Holocaust.
Yeah, and he was a huge talent, and music history might have taken a different turn if those composers like him, Gideon Klein, also would have survived. I mean, Schulhoff was a huge talent, as you can hear in this little piece. We are going to play. Mira Wang, my wife, and I will play. And Schulhoff basically said many times, I visited Theresienstadt once and got a tour, and I learned about that they had opera performances, and that he was organizing many very positive events. And that movement, where you'd see cultural heritage from all Middle Europe, some Czech, some Hungarian heritage in this very little Zingaresca movement, you will see that they tried to keep up the spirit so much, and that touched me so much, and that's why we wanted to play this piece.
Thank you. Well, go ahead, and I'm looking forward to this. Thank you, Jan, very much. And I see
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so Schulhoff, as I said, was an experimental composer, and his father was also killed in Theresienstadt. And he was also a political opponent that spoke up against the Nazis as a socialist, convinced Marxist. And he was incarcerated in Theresienstadt but died of tuberculosis soon afterwards. Let's listen to Jan.
Hi, Ute. It's wonderful to see you again. I mean, not for you, since we've known each other since my London Symphony Orchestra days, but for everybody else, I'm Clive Gillinson, the Executive and Artistic Director of Carnegie Hall, and we're so thrilled and honoured that you could be part of this Live with Carnegie Hall broadcast that's really about something that's a very, very big part of our next season, Voices of Hope, really looking at how it is that artists, no matter how appalling the circumstances, still had to create art in these circumstances where, and it wasn't about the misery and the agony, it was almost always about how do you inspire people, how do you give them identity, how do you give them a feeling of self-worth, how do you retain people's humanity. So to have you as a central part of this festival, which we'll be doing next year, and really giving this insight into the festival today means so much to all of us. So thank you so much.
No, thank you for giving me this opportunity to bring the Songs Fraternity to Carnegie Hall. It's quite an honor. And it is an important program. And especially in these times of oppression and darkness, I would say the spirit of music and the spirit of hope is very much the same. And this music can express that spirit of hope in the most poetic way, in the truthful way. So very much this program is about that.
Absolutely. Ute, one of the things I've always admired about you is, I mean, of course, this program, as we know, is looking at the 75th commemoration of the end of the Holocaust. And this has been a central thing for your life, trying to draw attention to this, really trying to, you know, do art, sing music, and really address this horrific chapter in human history. Tell us why it's been a thread that's run throughout your life.
It is just written into my book of life as a troubled post-war German and a Cold War German at the same time. I just have this grief and incredible outrage written in my body, in my brain, in my heart, in my soul. It is part of me, of my existence, and it is heritage that I didn't ask for it, but it is a heritage for every German to never forget, to always remember, and to never stop asking questions to the other generations, and to give this message further on to the future generations. Now, for me, it started in the 80s when I was so lucky to be the protagonist of this huge project by Decca in London. That's when we met for the first time. I had my first concerts in the London with the London Symphony Orchestra. I was the protagonist of the series of recordings called Degenerate Music and Arte de Musique. It was a very brave project that included 20 CDs with the music of the Jewish composers that were exiled by the Nazis or murdered by the Nazis. And I was responsible for the songbook for Kurt Weill, Bertolt Brecht, for Friedrich Holländer, Spoliansky, Schiffer, the Berlin Cabaret songs, the entire catalog of Bertolt Brecht and Weill. And it was a revival that was initiated through this project. It was very, very important. It was right around the fall of the Berlin Wall when it really hit recognition in the world. And with that project, I just kept talking about Weimar, the Holocaust, the incredible artistic potential that was vibrant throughout the years of Weimar, that is entirely was shattered by the Nazis after 1933. And I always said, what would have happened if the Nazis wouldn't have shattered this culture? And I always said the 60s would have happened in the 40s, right there in Berlin. So I was lucky to be a pioneer with this for the revival of this music, very important music, and that was denounced by the Nazis. And then the other side of the story is really the composers that composed in the ghettos and in the concentration camps that were not able to immigrate, to get out of Germany, and their voices all were silenced by 1945. So it is a conclusion and a continuation of my singing the music of Weimar in a certain way.
Ute, so thank you again so much for your participation, both today in the festival, but more particularly for the way you spent your life looking at things that really matter to the human race. And, you know, and these things must never, ever be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. Now, I just want to mention that if you want the viewers from all over the world submit some questions to Facebook and Instagram live streams, I will answer them at the end of this broadcast. Let's go now to another chapter, a story that existed parallelly to the life inside the concentration camps. I want to talk a little bit about Marlene Dietrich, as I'm right now also very much, I was supposed to be on the road with my evening about Marlene Dietrich, based on a phone call I had with her in 1988 in Paris. Now she became famous through The Blue Angel. It was filmed in Berlin, the Weimar Berlin, and she left Germany to become a Hollywood star. Joseph von Sternberg had asked her to come along, and he put her into many gorgeous, huge blockbuster movies at the time. But the Germans wanted her to come back to Germany. They wanted to make her a movie star for the Nazis and appear in films by Leni Riefenstahl and others. And Marlene said, of course, I don't want to come back. I've heard the stories from my friends, my Jewish immigrants from Berlin that have arrived in Los Angeles. I know how people are treated over there in Germany. She said it didn't take much brains to be an anti-Nazi. As a matter of fact, she publicly renounced her German citizenship and officially celebrated her newly acquired American citizenship as a statement to prove her loyalty to the Americans. And of course, that was very difficult for the Germans to accept this. They actually spread the rumor at the time that she was corrupted by the Jews. Then the war started, and Marlene decided to sign up for the army. She wanted to be there for the troops at the front lines. It started in Italy, Sicily, North Africa, always back to America, because the musicians were afraid of dying. They had families at home, but she kept going at the front lines, Iceland, Ireland, England, and France. And she sang for the soldiers to lift their morals in the trenches, sometimes with the bombs flying above their heads, covered in dirt, and also, of course, in better situations. After 18 months straight at the front lines, her good friend Billy Wilder said that she spent more time at the front than General Eisenhower at the time. She said that is true. But she also enjoyed it very much to be with her soldiers. She called them her boys, and they were her best friends. And she kept contact with some of them throughout her lifetime. Now, in 1943, her song was broadcast at the military stations of the Belgrade radio, and it was broadcast all over Europe. Goebbels hated that song. He called it kitsch with the smell of corpses. But she said it was beautiful because for 3 minutes, everyone dreamt the same dream of home and love and a place to go that is more beautiful than the darkness of the war. The British listened, the French, the Portuguese, the Russians, all of them, to this love song. Underneath the lamplight, by the barricade, darling, I remember the way you used to wait. There that you kissed me tenderly, and you loved me, you'll always be my lady of the lamplight, my own Lili Marleen. Resting by the barracks, just behind the line, even though we've parted, your lips are close to mine. You wait where the lamplight softly gleams, your sweet face seems to haunt my dreams. My lily of the lamplight, my lily of the my own Lili Marleen. Marlene said at the time that she did not know what was happening inside those concentration camps. She was afraid of capture.
Why don't I just do a 20-second?
You need to go on, Elisha, we hear you in the live stream. She was afraid of capture, as a matter of fact, Marleen. She said, can you imagine what they would have done with me? I was an expatriate fighting for the enemy. They would have thrown me into those camps and shaved my head and hung me publicly. When she heard later on, she said, what they were doing inside those camps, she had no words to express the pain and to express the shame, she said. She could only think, if God had created this world, if he really had, he needs to go back to the drawing board and start all over again, revise his creation, the capacity of evil in the human being. Such evil must be a mistake, compared and paired with a longing for love. What a concept for suffering. Marleen talked about Kurt Weill. Kurt Weill told her the story of his friend, his good collaborator and contemporary, Viktor Ullmann. Now, Kurt Weill left Germany in 1933 together with Lotte Lenya. They took the train to Paris and later the boat from Cherbourg to New York. And he started a new life here in America. But his contemporary, Viktor Ullmann, also a student of Boosey, said, I'm not coming with you, I'm staying here. Things will be fine, it's just a dark chapter in history. Everything will be fine, I will wait this out. Until it was too late, he was put into the ghetto and then brought to Theresienstadt. The Nazis had destroyed all his huge body of work, compositions, symphonies, string quartets and everything, but he kept composing in Theresienstadt, as Theresienstadt was kind of a show-off ghetto for the Nazis. They wanted to show the world how well they treated the prisoners. On Fridays, they made beautification programs where they eliminated every trace of torture and murder. And on Saturday, they would invite guests. So the Jewish people would perform the music that they had composed inside the ghetto. Yes, one of them was Viktor Ullmann. He composed and composed with a hope in his heart that he would make it out one day. But he didn't. He was put onto the train to Auschwitz. Here's a little song that he composed in Theresienstadt. Daisies. Somewhere there are daisies. In the forest, next to the lake. Chavele is in love. She picks the daisies and dreams. He loves me. He doesn't love me, he loves me. He must love me. Oh, what happened to my summer? And what happened to my love? Im Walde beim Teiche, dort seinen gewachsen, Margaretke elend und klein, wie kleinige Sunen mit weißinke Strahlen, mit weißinke Tralala. Wie kleinige Sunen mit weißinke Strahlen, mit weißinke Tralala. Suchst du Mädel, was hast du verloren? Was willst du gefielen in Gras? Sie guckt in der Weiten und murmelt verrollt durchs Liedele Tralala. Sie guckt in der Weiten und murmelt verrollt durchs Liedele Tralala. He loves me not, he must love me. Kurt Weill listened to the song later on, and he told Marleen how much he loved Viktor Ullmann and how well he remembered him. Now Kurt Weill, let's go back to one of his most wonderful compositions from his German time, The Years of Weimar, together with Bertolt Brecht. For there are those in the darkness
And there are those in the light. One can see those in the bright light, but not those in the night. One can see those in the bright light, but not those in the night. I was just past my 16th birthday when you dropped in one day from the blue, and you said to come with you to Burma and to leave all the fixing to you. I asked you what job you were doing, and I swear that you answered to me. You had something to do with a railway and nothing to do with the sea. You talked a lot, Johnny, a lot of lies, Johnny. You took me for a ride, Johnny, all along the line. And I hate you so, Johnny. You're grinning there, Johnny. Just take that damn pipe out of your mouth, you swine. You Johnny, done the worst that you know. Zuhabaya Johnny, oh God, and I love you so. Zuhabaya Johnny, warum bin ich nicht froh? Du hast kein Herz, Johnny, und ich liebe dich so. I hadn't the chance to wonder how you earned that particular name, but that coastline consisted of places where it turned out you often came. One morning we'll wake in our lodgings and we'll hear the sheep pounding the rocks, and you'll get up and walk off in silence, 'cause your ship is down there, the docks. You have no heart, Johnny. You're no damn good, Johnny. You're leaving now, Johnny, without a line. And I still love you so, Johnny, just like at the start, Johnny. Just take that damn pipe out of your mouth, you swine. Ach, nimm noch die Pfeife aus deinem Maul, du. Und so you, Johnny, done the worst that you know. So you, Johnny, mein Gott, und ich liebe dich so. So Johnny, warum bin ich nicht froh? Du hast kein Herz, Johnny, und ich liebe dich so. Now, I'm very excited to talk to Elisha Wiesel. Are you there, Elisha?
Hi, Ute.
Hey,
I think this is it's a lovely moment to close the program. I want to say that Carnegie Hall has been so exceptionally thoughtful in its treatment of Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Day of Remembrance, and it's been an incredible hour plus a little bit. I know we ran over, and I appreciate the patience of all of our viewers. It was really an exceptional opportunity to hear music from this era played so beautifully by yourself and Jan and the others, and also to hear Orly's story about her mother, just incredibly moving. So, as we close the program, I really just wanted to offer my thanks to Carnegie Hall for its thoughtful treatment of this.
Did they tell you to hurry up, Elisha? Did they tell you to hurry up? I think we can keep talking.
We're quite over time, Ute.
That doesn't matter. I think the online keeps going. So I do want to talk to you. Yes, we can keep going.
Yeah.
Elisha, I want to talk to you. I'm rather very touched to actually be able to speak to you, as you are the bloodline of Elie Wiesel. You carry his heritage into our time. He was such an extraordinary man. Some people said he was the most important Jewish man in this world. And he was able, as a survivor of Buchenwald and Auschwitz, to convert his sufferings into a mission to search for greater humanity in our world. He supported the Jewish cause and many human rights causes. He received the Nobel Prize and was called a messenger to mankind, a supporter and fighter for victims of oppression. He expanded to embrace all repressed people and races in the world. I want to know from you, as a second generation, how you experienced your childhood with your father, and how you were connecting with your father through his pain and his hopefully his happiness for you too.
Yeah, sure. And again, I think we're going to be brief because we are over time. But I'll comment to that. Holocaust Remembrance Day, it's interesting, was chosen. Like, where does the date come from? Why are we doing it now? In April on this particular day. Is it because of the liberations that happened in these preceding weeks? It's not Auschwitz liberation, which is somehow the most well-known of all the camps. Really, the date was chosen, and this has a lot to do with how I perceived my father and what I wrote about him. On the day that he passed. My father was remembered as a fighter for many things, for memory, for identity, for important causes. And Yom HaShoah, the date was chosen for the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto. It was chosen as really the moment to remember that although many were, realized way too late what was happening, in the pockets where the Jewish people realized that they were under desperate attack, they really carved an amazing arc as they stood up for themselves, took up weapons, and fought to defend themselves. And I think that my father's legacy is really one of fighting back, of saying it's not okay to be silent. If we see anti-Semitism or racism, whether it's happening on the universal scale, whether it's us doing it to others or we see it happening to others, we have to do something about that. So he has an incredible legacy of activism that I think is important to remember on this Yom HaShoah, this day of remembrance. And we've never needed that mindset, I think, more than now, because there is anti-Semitism coming at us from all sides of the political spectrum. There are, terrible things happening in the world, and the fight is not over.
May I ask you about the silence that he so many times spoke about at his lectures at universities? He always said about his books, he had written 57 books, and he said, the weight of the silence is much larger than the weight of the words. The silence in between the words, and I could just imagine what he means with that silence, this bottomless, endless silence towards the core of the earth where all pain and senselessness is united. And I want to know whether you experienced as a child this silence in him.
Well, that's how I would always know I was in the biggest trouble, is if he was quiet.
Interesting. How did you deal with it?
Look, my father was a very personal man, and he kept a lot on the inside. no matter how much he spoke publicly about his memories and the Holocaust, there was a lot that he chose not to share. And I think he really chose to spare me as a young person growing up from a lot of the weight or the burden. I think he felt intensely that it was a huge burden to place on a second generation survivor, the knowledge of what had happened before. And, my father, really, to his credit, he did not talk openly with me about the Holocaust. He never would sit me down and expose me to film. Now, I experienced it in an ambient fashion. I traveled with him and my mother, to concentration camps, as a young person. But it wasn't part of my explicit curriculum. And I think that as much as possible, my father aimed to shield me and let me have a normal life as a young person.
Yeah. And what about now? You left your job in the business world, and are you active in his foundation?
Yeah, look, his foundation, it's interesting, is really a testament to the power of my mother. My mother really is the one who had a very concrete vision for what does it mean to do good in the world. And if you look at the foundation that my mother and my father started shortly after the Nobel Peace Prize, there were two parts to it. One very much represented my father and this belief that dialogue could bring people together. And he would sponsor conferences, whether it was with the King of Jordan trying to bring together the head of the Palestinian Authority and the Prime Minister of Israel in closed session doors, or bringing kids together from war-torn areas, as dispersed as Belfast and Belgrade. That was really my father's element of the programming. But my mother really believed in making a difference in Israel. So her arm of the programming had a lot to do with Ethiopian Jewish children being brought up in Israel and making sure that with all of the racism that she had seen as an NAACP card holder and civil rights marcher in the 50s and 60s in the United States, she was determined to not see Israel make the same mistake. And that was sponsoring the Ethiopian Jewish programming at the time of the Operation Solomon airlifts.
Yes. And did your father ask you before he passed to carry on with his missions and activities in his name?
Listen, he did, but not in the way you might expect. I think that, look, my father's words are out there and my father's messages are out there. And I think that there are, thankfully, millions of people who are inspired by his message of political activism and what it means to be present and not tolerate hatred or indifference. I take my father's legacy and mission very seriously on a much more personal level. My father asked me really to do two things as a child growing up. The first, when I was much younger, he made it very clear that he thought Jewish continuity was one of the most important things to him. And he made it very clear that I was, when it was time to marry and have a family, that it was to be a Jewish family. And I took that extremely seriously. And the second thing he said is he wanted me to say Kaddish, which is the morning prayer, which is actually a celebration of God. And he wanted me to say it for the full morning period. And, at first I thought he had asked that for him, that he wanted that for his soul, for his peace of mind. But I realized much later, actually, it was he was doing me a favor. This was a gift for me. And when I think about keeping my father's legacy alive, I really think about how I raise my children and exposing them to Jewish continuity and giving them a sense of where they come from. And that, yes, the Nazis came and they tried to eradicate our people and our way of life and our being. But thank God we're still here and we still are singing the songs that were sung, for centuries, if not thousands of years, and reading the texts and studying them and living a way of life that's commensurate with those values and that way of being. And thank God we also have a state of Israel that ensures that never again can there be a Holocaust. So I try to lead my father's legacy in a very personal way in how I raise my family and the values that we expose them to.
Yeah, I understand. How old were you when you read Night?
Maybe 11 or 12.
Really?
Yeah.
And did your children read it? They're young.
My son, who's 14, has read it. My 11-year-old daughter has not yet read it.
Thank you, Alicia. That is
Thank you very much, Ute.
Beautiful, beautiful words. Thank you for appearing and hope to see you somewhere here in Manhattan.
Thank you, and thank you to Carnegie Hall.
Thank you. Now, we are very late. Am I supposed to answer some questions now, or maybe... Are we,
yes, no, you can answer.
This is the end.
Are we still online? Are we still streaming?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So, Max, you want to read me something?
Sure. Well, first off, we want to thank everyone joining from Mexico City, Zurich, Sao Paulo, Moscow, Chile, Kuwait, New Delhi, Boston, and also right here in New York City. So thank you to all the viewers. So here are a couple questions that viewers submitted.
Let's do one because we're very late.
Let's do one? Okay.
Yeah.
Pick the best one. Okay. Let's do two. Here are the good two. How has this music helped you make sense of tragedies and difficulties in the past and in your own life?
It is an expression of the difficulties. It doesn't help solving it, but it is an expression. And as we know, when the soul is allowed to speak through tears, through theater, through music, it is an amazing dimension in music. Often today, you know, I listen to some other kind of music, and Max, you are bringing some other music into our house nowadays. And I have to say that with this kind of music that I have presented over the last hour that exists out there in the world, it exists in opera, in Schoenberg, in also in pop music, in jazz. But there is something so strong and powerful connecting to the human soul, to this universe. We don't get the answers, but we are allowed to connect to that eternal question. That's really what it's about.
And one more forward-looking question is, do you have any advice for people who want to create music or art in response to this global pandemic?
Oh, well, I think that we had a lot of creative time, time of worry, definitely, but we are able to stay home and to live life. This kind of isolation that happens is often very good for creative process. All the music I ever have written to the Pablo Neruda words or Paulo Coelho words or my own songs, I've always written in isolation. The isolation makes you take a step back and contemplate and reach in the silence, maybe some of that silence that Elie Wiesel also felt. In that silence lies the secret. And the secret to art. So hopefully people will take this as a creative time in life. And I want to thank again my two musicians, Max and my son Max and Vanna at the piano. We survived the thunderstorm here in New York, and I want to say goodbye to all of you. Thank again Carnegie Hall for this opportunity to reach so many people all over the planet. And we want to finish with a Bob Dylan song that searches again for a message of humanity. How many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? How many sheets must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? How many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many years can a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? And how many times can a man turn his head pretending he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many times
must a man look up before he can really see the sky? And how many ears must a man have before he can hear people cry? How many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. It's blowing in the wind. It's blowing in the wind. The answer. Good night, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you for listening to this. Thank you. It's blowing in the wind.